All right. So just going over, I'm going to share my screen again here. Just going over our task list for this week. As we kind of talked about on Tuesday, this week is all about Chapter 5, our modify commands. Some of our basic ones we'll be going through, and some time for assignment 2. So we've covered most of Chapter 5 already. We're only missing one chapter out of it that I'll cover today, and our 3 final practice problems here for Chapter 5. So 5B, 5C, and 5D. We'll go through those today as well. And whatever time we have left after we've done our last sub-chapter there and our practice questions, then we can move on. And the rest of the time will just be kind of free work period for working on assignment 2. Okay. Any questions about what to expect? Or any questions about assignment 2 right away, if you've been trying it out already? All good? Okay. So, on Tuesday, we covered some basic editing commands, just as a little kind of re-review of what we covered. We covered moving, copying, rotating, mirroring, scaling, and I believe that's it. Those 5 there that we covered on Tuesday. Just as a bit of a refresher as well, if I have any shape, I can use the move command to move it around, of course. Of course, all of my editing commands are going to immediately ask me to select objects. I have to tell AutoCAD what objects I want to move in this case, or just edit in general. Pressing enter moves me along this command to the next step to specify the base point, and then recall as well, the base point is kind of the grab handle that I'm going to move this shape around with. For this example, I'm just going to use the center point of the circle. I have my object snaps on. Using object snaps with move is generally a very good idea. This way, we can kind of move objects into place precisely so they're properly attached to maybe other objects we're trying to connect them to. So I can click on the center point and I can move it around. Wherever I click, it'll be placed. Just like the line command as well, I can click to place the next point, or in this case, to move the object. Or I can enter a length angle or a set of coordinates to determine the final position of this shape. Okay, so I can put in a length angle, 10 units, 45 degrees, and I'll move it 10 units up and to the right. Or I can use the move command and specify coordinates. So if I put in 10, 10, this should move the circle 10 units to the right and 10 units up. So again, it moves at a 45-degree angle, but in this case, 10 degrees over, or 10 units over, 10 units up. Okay. And as a bit of an application kind of thing, again, with my trusty fuse symbol, I can kind of draw the individual pieces. Just like this. And then when I need to stitch this all together, I can properly move everything in place. These 2 center points of the circles should be 8 units apart. So I can use something like object snap tracking to set these 8 units apart. And then this rectangle section in the center here, I can move that into the middle. Again, snap tracking. Since center point to center point is 8 units, the center point of this rectangle should be 4 units. So I'll type in 4, and that will center it properly here, because halfway from center point to center point should be 4 units. And then I can finish it off just by going quadrant to midpoint with a couple lines here. So move's pretty helpful, just stitching things together. With more complicated diagrams and with more complicated symbols, you might have to kind of move things into place more often. This is pretty simple. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could draw something like this, but this is just kind of one method. You could start with the circle. If you knew the length of these lines, you could do the line and then figure out the rectangle and kind of make your way through with just drawing tools. But often our modified tools are going to kind of help us speed up along with a lot of our work. So last thing with move as well, I can click and drag to really quickly move an object just by selecting it. When it's highlighted blue like this, I can click and drag on any line. Just remember, I can't click and drag on a grip. It doesn't work properly. So just on any of the highlighted blue lines, and then I can click and drag to rapidly move that object around. Okay. We also talked about copying. So with copy, again, I can select objects and then choose the copy command, or vice versa. I can use copy and it's going to ask me to select objects. Either way works. And copy is going to allow me to make duplicates of something that I've already drawn here. So I've selected my entire fuse here. It asks me for a base point. I'm going to use the center of this fuse, and then I can make duplicates at will here. And it's going to continue making duplicates until I hit escape to exit out of that command. With copy as well, don't forget we also have an undo function. So if I copy and make a few copies of this fuse, I can then use U to undo the most recent copy. Okay. And of course, we have our clipboard, so I can right-click on that object, cut, copy, paste, or your typical shortcuts, Control-C, Control-V, to copy and paste objects as well. Just keep in mind, copy versus copy with base point, and same with cut and cut with base point. If you don't specify a base point by just using the standard Control-C, it's automatically going to throw a base point in the bottom left corner. Otherwise, if you choose a base point, then you can select where that grab handle is. So if I regularly copy it with just a Control-C, when I go to Control-V, paste, you can see my grab handle's been defaulted to the bottom left of the extents of that selection. Okay. Rotating, again, fairly straightforward. I can take the object and I can choose rotate. In this case, my base point is the pivot point for that object to spin around. And it's a good idea generally when you're using rotate to also use polar tracking, so you can have the proper angle or exact angle being chosen when you go to rotate here. If I don't have polar tracking on, there's no 100% guarantee where I click is going to be the correct angle. Or of course, I can just manually type it in. Manually typing in will ensure there's no hanging decimals there, because I haven't specified decimals for AutoCAD to use. So if I put in 40, AutoCAD interprets that as exactly 40 as well. Okay. I can also copy within the rotate command. So if I bring that back, I can select it, choose rotate, rotate the object, use my down arrow to copy in the copy or the down arrow menu here, or by typing C for copy within the command. And that will keep the original intact while allowing me to make a rotated copy as well. Next, we talked about scale a little bit. With scale, I can either enlarge or shrink objects. So with scale, selecting this rectangle I've drawn, selecting the base point, this is going to be the point that it grows or shrinks from. So if I choose the corner, it grows and shrinks to that corner. Or if I choose something like the geometric center, then it's going to grow and shrink to the center of that rectangle. And of course, our scale factor we can type in, or I can manually kind of eyeball it. I might use object snaps if there's another corner to match this to. Anything like that, whatever is necessary. And my scale factors less than 1 are going to shrink the object. My scale factors larger than 1 are going to enlarge the object. So something like 2 will double the object's perimeter. Okay. And just like with rotate as well, I can copy within a scale command. So I can make a copy to keep the original intact and make a scaled object as well. And finally, on Tuesday, we talked about mirror, where I can make any shape and make a duplicate that will be flipped across a axis of symmetry or a mirror line. In this case, it's not going to ask me for a base point. It's specifically a mirror line. I need a line of symmetry across. And it'll ask me if I want to erase the original or keep it. So in this case, I'll hit no and keep both triangles. Okay, so this saves us a lot of time as well, like I mentioned, with some projects where there's a lot of symmetry in an object. Things that are radial, like circles, kind of often comes up, where I can draw just the left half of whatever shape I need, and then the right half I can just mirror it and copy it over without having to do like approximately 50% of the work. So if I do the fuse again, I can just simply draw the circle and the rectangle and the first line here. Doesn't seem to like that very much. There you go. So I can do just half of it, approximately half of the work, and then just mirror this across the center point, and that will give me the other half. So if there's ever a line of symmetry that you see in a drawing, you can save yourself somewhere around 50% of the work just by using a mirror command. And then not erasing the source objects, then I get both halves there. Okay? So that's my lightning round of what we covered on Tuesday. So today, we're going to go through the practice problems. We're going to go through chapter 5.7, which is about editing with grips. And then from there, it's just kind of free work period on assignment 2. So to kick it off here, I'm going to give you guys some time to work through practice 5B. We started it a little bit, but there wasn't much time towards the end of the class on Tuesday to work on it. So I'll give some time today, right now, to work on 5B. Again, the textbook chapter 5 is posted to Brightspace if you don't have access to the textbook just yet. Practice 5B in the week 4 folder, and this is on page 16 of the PDF. So I'll give you guys maybe 25, 30 minutes to get through it, and then we'll go through it as a class and continue on from there. Okay? How's everyone doing with practice 5B so far? Good. About how far along are you guys? Just for timekeeping here. About halfway done the first 2 or 3 tasks or so.
Just starting task 4.
Okay.
How do you get the chairs to line up nicely, like center of the desk? Use a snap for that?
I'd use the midpoint snap of that angled section of the desk.
Okay.
I'll do a little demo here. So
Oh,
if
I
I
thought
took
I
the
had
desk,
midpoint on. It's not.
ah,
That would be why.
yeah.
Why is it so difficult to convert your file into a PDF?
Few reasons. AutoCAD likes being very specific with its layouts, so it wants page setup to be very exact. Just because when you go to blueprint and make manual or physical blueprints, they have to be pretty precise in terms of their design and everything when it gets printed out. So it's not like your standard Word document where you're probably printing on A4 every time. When you're printing blueprints, the size of paper could vary quite a bit. So AutoCAD has a very advanced way of printing by default compared to something like Word.
Yeah, I was just kind of expecting to be like save as and PDF or
Yeah,
export PDF, but
yeah. And functionally, the communication between software for printing and moving something into a PDF is like technically the same process. So they end up using the same uh, coding, I suppose, between converting things to PDF and printing. It's basically the same kind of setup.
okay. All right, well, I'll submit this and see if I did it right.
This is just a practice assignment, so this isn't for grades or anything like that.
Oh no, this
The
is
five
for
oh for
assignment 2.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, go for it. I mean, nothing really wrong can happen. You can always resubmit, so
Is it green or blue that's select all? The selective way of doing it.
green is the crossing window, so you just have to tag it. Blue is the one that has to fully encircle the object.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep, so the drawing for assignment 2, the actual drawing file itself should be in the week 4 folder. Or the PDF file is in week 4, the drawing file is in extra practice. So in the extra practice folder, it's extra practice 2, and then it's the drawing file.
Is it in the excuse me, is it in the book?
Assignment 2?
Yeah.
No. Assignment 2 isn't in the book. No. Only assignment 1 was. The other 6 aren't in the textbook.
Got it.
Yeah.
Did you make them?
No.
No.
The previous instructor, or well, he still teaches as well, but the previous instructor that teaches this course as well, he developed a bunch of them.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wait, so where do we find the drawing like that that has all the dimensions and stuff?
Okay, so for extra practice 2, which is assignment 2, the drawing file is the blank one that you actually do your AutoCAD drawing on. The PDF is the one with the schematic on it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So when we create this PDF, are you just looking for export PDF or like publish, set up like to publish?
If you go to print and then plot, you should have if you do the import method, that works too. But
'Cause I just did export PDF. I created a PDF, but it's really small. And then I went to like do the publish method here now, and it's like ask for vector qualities and things like that. I'm just like, this looks a little more, but it's like I'm just wondering what you're looking for.
so the first one you did, you mentioned it was really small, right?
Yeah.
What probably happened was that you printed it from the model space like this. If I print while viewing the drawing, like the drawing space as it normally is, it's going to come out weird because AutoCAD's going to manually try to figure out what the dimensions of the drawing's supposed to be. So instead of being on the drawing space, the model space here, you need to go to the layout. So at the bottom left here, there should be one called A4 or something like that. One of the tabs in the bottom left.
Oh.
And it gives you the paper space or the layout. This is what that drawing will look like when it's actually printed out. So if you're on this screen now and you go to print or export to PDF, then you should have the correct page sizing.
And that's it, eh?
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah. Just because you mentioned your thing came out really small, I figure that's probably it. We'll talk about layouts later down the line.
Okay.
But generally layouts, when we make them, it's kind of like telling AutoCAD how this should be printed on a paper. When we do the model itself, it's just basic drawing. It's a bunch of vectors and equations that AutoCAD remembers. When the layout's formed and we actually put the drawing on the layout, then we're telling AutoCAD how it should be printed on paper.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. How's 5B coming along? Is everyone mostly done? Anyone need a bit more time with it?
Pretty much done.
Pretty much done? Anyone need more time at all? Don't be afraid to speak up. This isn't a high pressure course. We can give you some more time. Okay, if everyone's good, then I'm gonna go through it just to kind of demonstrate kind of the workflow. You've likely done it correctly, but just to kind of demonstrate as well. Or if you've kind of gotten stuck somewhere, then I'll go through it just so you have an idea how to continue. So I'm going to share my screen and go through 5B here. So I have the arrange-A drawing already open here. So let me scroll back in my textbook here. Okay, so it's letting me know right away that I'm going to be using move, copy, rotate, scale, and mirror, same 5 we covered. First task is going to be moving objects in the first place. So we're going to use the move command to move this desk, little potted plant here, the computer, and the chair into place into this first top right cubicle. So I have arrange-A open here, just like it asks. It wants me to toggle off polar tracking, so I'm going to turn it off. And it also wants me to toggle off object snap tracking, just so I don't have those in the way here. But it wants me to keep object snap on and only have endpoint active. The reason for this being that I'm going to be using the endpoints, the corner pieces of this desk, to kind of fit it in the corner of the room. Where we have corners on objects that are going to meet up, it's generally an endpoint to endpoint snap. So this kind of guides you through it, telling you exactly what snap to use. But when we go through some of the assignments, the actual graded ones, I'm not going to tell you explicitly what tools to use at times. So it might be up to you to kind of figure out which snaps should be active or which tools to use. Again, as long as you get the right end product, there's no big deal. You can use whatever method you really like. Okay? As long as you have your drawing to spec, there's not much I can really complain about. So, first things first here, we're going to move the desk into the corner of that top right cubicle. So I'm going to use my move command. You can select it from the ribbon. You can type MO, whatever you, or MOVE for move. Either way, whatever you choose. Keep in mind for this one, I would not be able to click and drag to move because it specifically wants me to fit this desk into the corner of the room. If I click and drag, I have to eyeball that connection there. So it's better to use the command in this case. So I can use that, let me put back actually, and use the command properly. Selecting the base point in the top right corner, connecting that to the top right corner of the cubicle. Now they're perfectly aligned there. Okay. So the click and drag method in this case wouldn't be acceptable because it does actually ask me to precisely put that desk in the corner. Moving along here, it wants me to move the chair and place it in front of the desk. Similar to what's in the drawing there. So it's not asking for anything specific. We're going to move this chair around later. What I'm going to do is that since I know that this is going to ask me to rotate this chair later, I'm going to do myself a favor ahead of time. And with this insertion point here, I'm going to move this chair using the insertion snap. And I'm going to align it with the midpoint of this angled line of the desk. So I have this angled line here. I can get the midpoint snap. And I'm going to break the rules a little bit here and use object snap tracking and polar tracking here to move it 45 degrees down. And just place it some ways along here. So it's going to look a little weird right now, but I know that in the future I'm going to have to rotate this. And by having this insertion point in line with the midpoint, later on when I go to rotate, I can use that same point to line it up with the desk properly. So now my chair is perfectly aligned and it's centered on that angled portion of the desk. So that's kind of skipping ahead, but I'm doing myself a favor for later down the line by lining it up that way. Okay. Next, next it wants me to move the plant. into the open space next to the desk. So I'll take the plant here and just move it in the empty space here. I could use the midpoint snap here again. Again, kind of beyond the scope of the assignment. You don't have to do this. But just for personal preference, I want this aligned with the desk, so I'll just leave it like that. And then finally, my computer monitor here, I can do kind of the vice versa here, using the midpoint and then tracking up to the right a ways and place it somewhere along this line. Doesn't have to be perfect, somewhere there. So mine isn't centered in the space up here, but I do know I'm going to have to rotate this later. So again, I'm using that insertion point as my pivot point later to spin this around to make sure it's centered on that slanted part of the desk. Okay. This is all extra stuff. The assignment obviously, or the practice 5B instructions obviously didn't say to do all these details, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea of where you can save some time down the line. Okay. So I've moved the plant into the open space. Next, we need to copy. So it wants me to make a few copies of the potted plant. Wants one kind of between these first two cubicles. It wants one down here. There's a little seating area, I suppose, supposed to be near the bottom. So I'm going to copy out the chair, put out 3 chairs for a little seating area, and then copy out the 2 potted plants as well. Okay. So it wants me to do the plant first. So I'll select the plant, deselect the chair here, use the copy command. I'll grab it by the insertion point. Again, this is also the center point on this shape. There is a circle in the center, so I might be able to use a center snap. And I'm just going to line this up roughly with the wall here. It says it doesn't have to be perfect. Or actually it does. I'm misreading. It wants me to use the bottom right corner, bottom left of the most inner wall. Okay, I kind of did do that. So the bottom left endpoint here, if I zoom in, it wants me to use the bottom left endpoint here to place my plant. If I get my tracking lines up here, get a bit better. There we go. Okay, so it's aligned with the bottom left corner of this wall here. And then it wants me to do the same here, copying this again. It wanted me to do the same command. No big deal though. And do the same with the other wall and bring it down beside the seating area here. Okay. Next, it wants me to do the chairs. So the chairs, I need to position them flush against the wall, it says. So using endpoint or midpoint to select the base point, and then use nearest as the object snap override to select it along the wall. So I'll choose or select the square here, the chair here, hit copy. I can use the midpoint snap of the back of the chair. The insertion point is also attached to the back of the chair here. Generally speaking, I wouldn't always assume the insertion point is exactly where it's supposed to be, but most people, when they make these blocks like this, they generally make the insertion point something that is particularly useful. But I'll play along and use midpoint in this case to select my base point. And then from here, I can object snap override, shift right click, go to nearest. And using a nearest snap, this will automatically snap the back of that chair to attach to the nearest line, being the inside of the wall. So I just have to be close by, and it's going to snap to the wall there. Because I can't use an endpoint or midpoint snap along here. There's no points of interest to really use. So nearest is kind of my best option here. It's not picky about the exact placement here either. if it wanted these spaced out a certain way or a certain space from the door, then I might object snap track from the endpoints of the walls over, but it's not concerned with that, so I won't bother. So I can do the nearest snaps here. Just kind of force some of them against the wall. So I have 3 chairs lined up here, all up against the wall. And I have my little seating area now. Okay. So that's all of my copying there. Task 3, it wants me to start rotating some objects. So in my status bar, make sure I have polar snap active, set it to 45 degrees. The desk angle here is 45 degrees. So it wants the monitor and chair to face that slant. So I'm going to have to rotate this chair 45 degrees clockwise and rotate this monitor 135 degrees the opposite way or so, 225 maybe. So I'm going to rotate this chair first. I'm going to use, since I've done myself a favor in advance, this midpoint should line up with the back of the chair. So I can just kind of line this up, set it to 315 degrees so it faces the desk. And then when I finish there, now this chair is both centered on that slant and it's facing the right angle there. I can pull it away just a little bit if I need a bit more space between the chair and the desk, but all is good. Okay. From here, it wants me to rotate the laptop now, or I guess in this case, this is a computer monitor. Maybe this is an older file. Using 350 degrees. So I'm going to rotate it again. I've done myself that favor. So 315 degrees. Rotating that monitor around. And then mine ends up, so these corners are kind of hanging, so I can just bring it along that polar line as well to bring it a little closer to the chair. Okay. Again, this drawing doesn't say anything about precision, so I'm not being precise about anything. This is just kind of like a top-down, maybe an interior design kind of thing, where they just want things laid out. The desk might have to actually fit in this room, so they wanted that precise. But the potted plants, the chairs, the computer likely can be shifted around, so they're probably not very concerned about the precision. From here, it wanted me to center the computer. I've already done that in advance to kind of help myself out. If this wasn't aligned, I could move it based on either the midpoints on either side here or the insertion point, and then I can line it up with the midpoint on this slanted part of the desk to go fix it. But I've done that in advance to kind of set myself up so it would be centered, so I don't have to do anything here. Now it wants me to use the copy command to select the chair, the desk, and the computer. And then it wants me to copy these over. It wants me to use the back corner of the desk as the endpoint because I'm going to be copying this desk setup to the other 2 cubicles here. So I can copy it over, place it in the next cubicle over, and the next one, and this one down in the corner here. Okay. So I've just taken the same setup, so I don't have to go back here, copy them, rotate each one of them, etc., etc. I can just copy them, use the same snap so the desk fits precisely, and now I have each of these cubicles set up properly. Okay. Next, task 4, we're going to move on to scaling. So right away, it's going to want me to put another potted plant on the top left cubicle's desk and the bottom right cubicle's desk. And then it wants smaller potted plants because these are going on top of the desk, so they need to be smaller. This one kind of hangs out a little bit, so I might make it a little smaller. I might just pull it in a little ways. Whatever the case may be here. Okay. Again, doesn't have to be perfect in this case. So it wants me to copy the plants to the upper left cubicle and the bottom right. I'll copy it over. Just choosing any of these plants is fine. Grabbing it by the center here. And then I can use 2-point object snap tracking. So I can center it on both midpoints here. It's perfectly in the center of this rectangle. And it wants me to scale this down. So I can select it, choose scale. My base point is the center of the plant. I've already centered the plant, so I want it to grow or shrink to that center point to keep its alignment in the desk. I wouldn't want to use a base point elsewhere, or else I'm going to misalign my plant as I scale it. So if I use the center point and use the scale factor it wants, 0.5, then I get it scaled and it's still centered. If I were to choose a different base point here, like on one of these leaves here, and put in 0.5, now I've undid the alignment that I tried to do earlier. So in this case, I've already centered it. So the base point I want to keep in the middle, set it to 0.5 so it fits nicely in that desk and it's still aligned midpoint to midpoint here. Okay. Same thing for the plant in the bottom right. I've scaled this one so I don't have to copy over and then scale both. I can just scale one and then copy this one and then throw it down into the, as long as I have the right base point here, I can just throw it down into that corner cubicle. Okay. And there I have both of those smaller potted plants on the desks. Okay, so next, the final task here, task 5, it wants me to start mirroring some objects. So this middle cubicle here, the second one, it's going to be flipped so that the computer is in the top left corner instead of the top right corner. So it wants me to use the mirror tool to do that. So I'll select mirror. It wants me to choose all of these objects here. Of course, the chair and the computer are going to have to be mirrored too if the desk is mirrored. So all 3 of these objects are selected. Hit enter. And now I have to make my mirror line. So it wants me to choose the end point of the line that separates the corner desk section from the straight desk section, which would be right here. And up to the top here, you can see I have pretty much a mirroring now. Of course, you could take all these objects and use rotate as well. Rotate would work fine here if you rotated it all 180 degree, or it would work almost as well using 180 degrees here to flip it over, or 90 degrees rather. And then here, erase source objects. In this case, I am just flipping the objects into a different orientation. So I could hit yes, because I don't want to keep the original desk, chair, and computer. So I'll hit yes to erase the source objects. And now I'm just left with the mirrored objects here, the chair, the desk, and the computer. Okay. It just so happens here that that mirror line works well across this segment of the desk. That's not always the case, so I might have to use the mirror line. I might use it across a midpoint from this cubicle. If I have a line segment between here and here, then I might use the midpoint between them as the mirror line. This one just so happens that this segment, endpoint to endpoint, matches up perfectly for a mirror line. It's equally as long on both sides. It's not always the case though. Okay. So now I have my final product here. I have all my desks and chairs and potted plants. And let me just double check the original drawing. So I've got this potted plant here, the little seating area with 3 chairs. Everything looks aligned, just double checking that I've completed everything. And that looks pretty similar to the final product. Okay. Any questions about 5B at all? In most cases, I might, if I'm working with a blueprint that has exact dimensions, I might be more concerned about using object snaps and object snap tracking and specific distances. But in this case, because it's not horribly overloaded with details, uh, I'm using fairly imprecise things, but I still want things generally aligned. So I was using some midpoint snaps just for alignment reasons, just to make it look nice, but that wasn't entirely required there. Okay. So it's about 7 right now. So I'll give you guys a 10-minute break here. We'll reconvene at 7:10, and then we'll continue on with our last topic, editing with grips, and then a couple more practice problems. Okay.
Hey Brent,
Yep.
could you walk me through on how you did the 2 midpoint centering of the plants?
Sure. So let me go back here. So I'm just going to move the desk back into place here. So with the 2 midpoint centering of the plants, if I take the plant here itself, I'm just going to grab the base point as the center of the plant. So I know by using the center point of this plant here, I have the center of it for alignment. Then, as long as I have my midpoint snap active, as well as my object snap tracking, let's make sure this is also active. Then I can highlight both the midpoints, the upper and lower part of the desk, those midpoints, as well as the left and right. And with object snap tracking, you can use 1 point. If I hover over it and move away, it leaves a little green plus sign for a tracking line. But if I use 2 points, so if I highlight a second point just by hovering over it and moving away again, I can get 2 tracking lines.
Oh yeah, I
So I
didn't
haven't,
have snap tracking on, so that probably makes the difference.
yeah. And then from there, I just take that plant and I highlight the midpoint on the top or the bottom, either or, and then the midpoint on the left or the right. And then tracking both of those two together should give me the center.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, let's continue on here. So, this all back. So continuing on, our last topic for chapter 5 here is editing with grips. So another method to do editing commands, you might prefer this one, you might prefer one of the previous ones. It's up to you. The only limitation is whether precision is generally involved in that method. So like we kind of talked about with move, if I click and drag, I lose the accessibility of having precision in where this is being moved to, but it's much quicker than having to go through all the steps of the command. So it's a bit of a give and take. There's a certain time and a place, but generally speaking, first is just be aware of the limitations of the method you choose, and then second is up to personal preference. Okay? Because we want our drawing speed to spec to be nice and orderly, but we also want to do them quickly. So whatever you prefer, whatever gets it done the fastest is also important. Okay. But it's second in importance to making sure it's precise. So with editing as well, we can edit with the grip points on an object. So if I select any object and highlight it blue, so something like this circle here, I click on it and it highlights blue to let me know it's selected. On this selection, we also have these grip points that become available to us, these little blue squares. These grip points are actually kind of embedded editing tools in that object. Each one of these grips has a default editing command attached to it, and it varies depending on the object that I've selected. So I have a few different objects that we've kind of talked about in the past here, circles, rectangles, lines, and each of these grips on the object and between different objects is going to do something slightly different. So starting with the circle here, we have a grip in the center point, and we also have coordinate grip points at the northeast, southwest quadrants of the circle. So if I select a grip by left clicking on it, so if I left click on that grip becomes the hot grip and it turns red. If you think about blue being a cool color, red being a hot color, hot grip makes the grip red. And in the case of the center point of a circle, the defaulted editing command associated with this grip is move. So if I select the center point and move my cursor around, I now have access to the move command. Okay, so I don't have to specify a base point and go through all the steps or anything like that. Just by selecting the center point grip, I now have access to move. Okay. Since I selected the center point, it's going to assume the base point is the center point of the circle as well. Now, if I use a different grip on this circle, one of the quadrant ones, it's going to be a different command. So if I select the north quadrant and move my cursor away, I now actually have the command stretch. Or in this case, it could also be scale. So I'm now able to increase or decrease the diameter of this circle. Okay. Same with the east, south, and west. These are all stretch points as well. South does it, west does it as well. So the quadrant grips on a circle are defaulted to stretch, whereas the center is defaulted to move. If I go to a rectangle now and check out its hot grips, or its grips here, if I choose a corner grip on this rectangle, so either one of these top left, bottom left, any of these corners, their defaulted grip editing command is stretch. So I'm now able to stretch the corners of this rectangle to a different point, and it kind of deforms the rectangle here. So I'm stretching out the two lines connected to that corner. So the defaulted editing command for corners of a rectangle are stretch. But if I use the grip between the corners in the midpoint of each of these lines, there's a grip here as well. I can click on that one, and it's also stretch, but it's stretched on the two connecting lines rather than the lines on the vertex or the corner. It's the lines across that line segment. So now it's stretching the left and right lines attached to that top line segment. Okay. So I always keep a parallelogram in this case, where I have parallel lines between opposite sides. But if I use a corner, it's stretching the two nearest lines to that corner to create kind of an odd-shaped, four-sided shape here. Okay, so each grip's going to have a different defaulted editing command. We'll talk about how to kind of switch between some of them as well. With a line as my final of my three objects here, if I use the endpoints here as the grip, the hot grip, this is also stretch. So I'm able to stretch the line, and the midpoint grip is move. Okay. So each of these grips has its own defaulted editing command. Some of these grips, though, are also multifunctional. So what I mean by that is that if I hover over the endpoint of this line now, this one actually has two functions. So it's defaulted if I just left click it, it is defaulted to stretch. But if I hover over it, I get a little menu and I have the multifunction of that grip as lengthen. And lengthen is going to allow me to stretch that line, but along its current axis. I can't stretch it to a different angle. It's on the same angle that that line exists as. Okay. So usually with some grips, it'll have a similar or commonly used editing command in that multifunctional list. So by default, it's stretch. I can put this point wherever. But if I hover over that grip, I can have access to lengthen and use that to keep that line at its current angle and just extend it. Okay. Some of these other ones, the circle itself has no multifunctional grips. If I hover over the quadrants or I hover over the center point, none of these are multifunctional. If I try it with the rectangle, I have a few. There's stretch. I can add a corner to it to make it a five-sided shape. I can remove a corner to make it a three-sided shape. So I could remove that corner and it just breaks it. So now I have a triangle. Or I can add a corner and now I have a pentagon of sorts. Okay. So I can get to the multifunctional portion of the grip just by hovering over it and getting this list here. Okay. Same with the line or the midpoint grips. There's stretch, that's the default one. I can also add corners, or I can convert that line into an arc. So I can convert it to an arc, so it's a curved line as well. Okay. Just making you aware that these options are available. We'll talk about some of these editing tools in a bit more detail as well. If you want even more options out of your grips, so there's the default by left clicking it and moving it around. There's hovering over it to get the multi-functions. But if I select a hot grip and right click on it, I get even more options out of that grip. So here now I have the stretch and lengthen from the multifunction and the default. And now I even have access to move, rotate, scale, mirror, copy. I can reset a base point, etc. So I can select move out of this list, or rotate rather, out of this list. And now I can rotate that line based on that hot grip. Okay, so I've highlighted that grip, turned it into a hot grip by turning it red. Right click And now I get some more options like move, rotate, scale, etc. Okay. So again, this is functionally no different than going through and using either the buttons on the ribbon, or if you type out the command, it's functionally the same thing. It's just another way to do it if you prefer. If you feel like this is quicker, just being able to grab it and then move it around, then this might be your preferred method. All of these work. Okay. When we're using the shortcut menu on the hot grips as well, if I can click on it properly here, in this shortcut menu, this actually works for multiple objects when it comes to move, rotate, scale, and mirror. So if I attach a rectangle to this, so I have this shape here, I can select both the rectangle and the line, select a hot grip anywhere on these two objects combined. So I can select the corner of the rectangle, let's say, right click, go to rotate, and now rotate both of those objects around that hot grip. Okay, so you can use hot grips for multiple objects at the same time as well. This is mostly limited to move, rotate, mirror, and scale. If I try to do something like choosing the corner, right click and stretch vertex, like stretching the corner, this doesn't affect the line at all because the corner is associated with a rectangle. So it has no net effect on that line there. Okay. But if I select multiple and I try something like copy, oops, something like move, for example, then it'll move both of the selected objects. Okay. So again, bunch of different ways you can use any of your modify commands. It's up to your personal preference. Okay. Something to kind of mention here as well. I kind of showed it briefly or alluded to it here, but with the stretch or lengthen tools, might as well kind of introduce them here because I've kind of demonstrated them with the grips. When we're using stretch, this is another one of our modify commands. It's also in the panel here, the modify panel. Stretch is going to allow me to move an endpoint, basically. So I'm moving this endpoint that I've selected to a new location. And you'll see that when I use stretch, I have two different numbers here, right? I have a 6.3208, and I also have a 16.4366. The smaller number, the 6.3, that is how much length I'm adding to the line, how much length it's increasing by. The 16.4 is what the total length of the line will be after I'm done stretching. So I kind of have two different ways to determine how much length I add to this line. I can manually, if I draw this line to be 10 units long, so this is a 10 unit long line. If I go to stretch it, I can add 5 units here in the smaller number. This will add 5 units to the length. So if I hit enter, now this should be 15 units long. But if I use the other method here, or the other input section, where I go to stretch again, the larger number is the total length of that line. So if I type this in to be 5 in here instead, the total length of the line will now be 5. And I can measure it here, and it says 5.0. Okay. Same thing if you use the stretch, the actual stretch tool. Select the object, press enter, select my base point, doesn't really matter where. Oh, should select this properly. And then it should stretch out. And I have to input whatever length to stretch it by. Okay. Along with the stretch on the grip here, we have the minor and major lengths. I can also press tab twice, and it'll set me to an angle And now I can determine the angle that it's being stretched by. And if I press tab again, I get another angle. So I can set multiple different angles for this line as well. Or just be increasing or decreasing the length. Okay. Since we're here as well, with the stretch tool, if I draw a triangle here, I have this triangle. If you're using the stretch tool, it's going to work like other editing commands where it asks for an object selection. In the case of stretch, however, the object selection is going to actually matter for how this tool is used. Unlike things where copy and stuff, I just got to copy or select what's being copied. Doesn't really matter where I click. With stretch, it actually matters how I go to select this object. So anything that I cross with a crossing selection for stretch, those lines that I cross will be stretched. Any lines that are inside my area will not be affected, and any lines that are outside of the area will also not be affected. Okay? The ones inside the area will move, but they won't be stretched. The ones outside won't move, and they also won't be stretched. So to kind of demonstrate what I mean here, I'm going to mirror this real quick. If I use stretch and I draw a crossing section or a crossing selection here, you can see that the crossing selection crosses the hypotenuse and the base of the left triangle, but it fully encapsulates the entire right triangle. The far left line of the left triangle is also outside of the area. So what I expect here is that the hypotenuse and the base of the left triangle will be stretched. The triangle on the right will only be moved, and the left line of the left triangle will stay in place and not stretch. So if I let go of my selection to select these objects now, press enter to move on, select my base point that I'm going to grab it by, and then go to stretch. Now you can see that right triangle is just being moved. The two lines that I crossed, the hypotenuse and base of the left triangle, are being stretched. And the left line of the left triangle is both remaining in place and it's not being stretched. Okay, so the selection of the objects with the stretch tool actually kind of matter for how this is being used. If I then use stretch something like this, that right side should move, the hypotenuse and base should stretch, and the left triangle should stay where it is. So I can select it like that. And then same idea, the right side isn't being stretched, but it is being moved. And those two lines that I crossed are being stretched. Okay. So it's a little intro to stretch as well. Just kind of fits in here because we covered it with the grips. Okay. Any questions about that at all? And same deal with lengthen. Lengthen's just along this current axis of the line. So if I were to use the hot grip and stretch, it's the same thing if I go, let me hover over it and lengthen, then I still get that minor and major length. I can add length or I can determine the total length, but it's just along the same axis that the line already exists on. Okay, so I can't change the direction of the line or the angle at all, but I can add length to it. Okay. So with that, you should be able to go through 5C. I'll give maybe like 10 minutes or so to go through 5C, and then we'll go through it together, and we'll see where we end up there. Okay? 5C is on page 27 of the Chapter 5 PDF. How are we doing with 5C there? Pretty close to done. Finished. Halfway.
About halfway.
Okay. How's 5C going there, folks?
All done now.
All done? Anyone still working on it? Done? Okay. My AutoCAD crashed here, so I'm just relaunching it. No one needs more time with it at all? Okay. So, just double check here, facade. Okay, so I'll quickly go through it here. So with 5C, I have facade-A open here, the drawing file. And we're going to use grips to design the front or the facade of this house, or whatever building this might be. Okay. So starting out, it wants me to make sure I have endpoint, midpoint, and intersection toggled on in my object snaps. And it wants me to turn off polar tracking and just make sure my dynamic input is still on. Okay. So with no command active, I'm not going to use any commands from the modify panel. I'm not going to type anything in. I'm just going to use the grips. I'll select the double door, and it wants me to put it in the middle of the wall here. So I can select it by the grip. The grip is already aligned with the bottom of this door, so I just have to pick the midpoint snap of the wall to place that correctly there. Okay. It wants me to do the same thing with the arched window and place the grip at the midpoint at the top of the door. So again, selecting it, the default command here is move. And since I'm already using the grip point, which is in the center or the midpoint of the bottom of this window, I can just match that with the midpoint at the top of the door. So it's evenly set there. There's an even amount hanging off of both sides here. Okay. So I've moved my door. I've moved that crescent window there. Now it wants me to move the square windows in. In this case, it wants me to copy them and place them on each of these light blue intersecting crossing lines here. Okay. So I'll select the grip on this window, right click it to copy. And then here, I'm just placing them on each intersection. It says there should be 9 in total, 4 on each side and 1 in the center. So now I have my 9 windows. And then I can exit out. I can remove this if I want, just because it's not part of the drawing anymore. These intersection lines, it wants me to remove. So I can manually click them. You might be able to do some sneaky crossing lassos in here. It's a bit tight for space though. And then I can just hit delete, or I can use the erase tool to get rid of these as they're no longer necessary. From here, it wants me to use the angled lines of the roof. So the 4 angled lines up here, these 4 up here, and I'm going to mirror and copy them so I have symmetrical roof lines up here. So I'm going to use mirror by clicking on any hot grip. Any of these 4 end ones will work. Choosing mirror and then making my line of symmetry. I'll also right click and select copy so it keeps my original intact for when I mirror. If I use mirror without selecting copy, by default with this shortcut menu, mirror is going to erase the original object by default. So I have to use the copy command kind of in between there to make sure that my original stays. So if I do this and just mirror it, so select the hot grip, mirror, and just make my mirror line, I now have the mirrored section of the roof, but the original is now deleted. So I have to go back, select the hot grip, right click, mirror, and then right click again, copy, so it leaves the original intact, and then make my mirror line. So now I have the full roof here. Okay. So my roof is done. From here, I need to select the center square window above the door and select the grip. So that's this square window, the one in the center here. Select the grip. And it wants me to rotate this window 45 degrees. So it's a diamond instead of a square. In order to do that, I can't just rotate it right away because the default position for that base point is where the grip is that I've selected. So I can't do it like this, or else I'm going to start misaligning the window. I could go back and move it, of course. But what I can do instead is right click and choose base point. This will reset where the base point is for any following commands. If I choose base point and now choose this intersection or this midpoint in the middle of the window, that is now my new base point, and I can right click again, rotate, and now I'm rotating against the new base point rather than the hot grip. Okay, and it wants me to specifically put this at a 45-degree angle so it looks like a diamond rather than a square. So 45, hit enter, and now I have my rotated window, and it's still in line with the other windows and with the door. Okay. Next, it wants me to change the scale of this window. Again, I'm going to have to change the base point so it shrinks down to the center of the window. And if I use scale here, I'm now scaling towards the center point there. So I can put in my scale factor of 0.7, hit enter, and now it's shrunken, and it's still in line with the surrounding objects. So it's still in line with the door, still in line with the windows to its sides. Okay. From here, I just need to scale the arched window. So I'm going to check the hot grip again. In this case, I still want this attached to the door. So this hot grip is perfectly acceptable because that grip is attached to the door. If I shrink down to that base point, it'll still be attached to the door. I don't have to change the base point in this case. So I can choose scale, and you can see that base point's always attached to the door there because it's kept still. So I don't have to change the base point. And this scale factor will be 0.65. And then enter. And my crescent window here now more or less fits my door. Okay. Last few sections on this one as well are some little notes about checking measurements with grips. So something I kind of skipped over, it's handy that grips also tell you measurements. So if I select something like the bottom line of this building and hover over a grip, it'll tell me the length of that object I have selected. So in this case, 49 feet, 6 inches. I can do this with circles. If I draw a circle here, select it, and hover over any of these quadrant snaps or grips, it tells me the radius of that circle. So you can use grips as a bit of a measurement tool as well. Okay. Other than that, that's pretty much it for today. Only things, 5D is still left out there. 5D is a repeat of 5B, except with grip editing rather than editing commands. So I won't go through it again, just because it's basically the same project, but with grips. I can do it next week if you guys want, but we're out of time today. I'll leave it as kind of, if you feel like going through it. If you like grips, it might be a good assignment to go through, or just little practice problem to go through, just to determine if you prefer grips or if you prefer modify commands. So if you go through it and you feel like it's pretty easy to use, maybe you prefer grips more, maybe you'll stick with grips. Up to you. Okay. Okay. So I'll leave it for now, 5D. If we need to go through it as a class, I can go through it next Tuesday. Other than that, we're pretty much done for today. Okay. If there's any questions, I'll stick around. Otherwise, you guys are good to go.
Hey, Brent.